So we were looking at doing some training, some work with our training program in terms of trying to understand how to interpret profiles and which profiles. And the question that came up to me was, which profiles are most common? Surely there's some set of profiles in the Hogan assessments that show up often. And so through a number of technical steps where we collect lots of data, and through a number of analyses on that data, we were able to parse down that these 8 profiles come up most frequently. So these are the ones that replicate across a variety of samples all over the world. And it's these 8 that show up in almost all of those samples and replicate all the time. And so we said these are the 8 most common profiles that we find in our assessments. The 8 profiles, the first one is called rebels, the second one is called marketers, the third one we call proletarians, the fourth one we call congenials, the fifth one we call overachievers, the sixth one networkers, the seventh one misfits, and the 8th one preppers. Rebels is a really interesting profile. There's a sizable percentage of the population that falls into this category. And rebels are really identified by their tendency to want to break the mold, so to speak. They are low on adjustment, they're high and excitable, so they're sort of dissatisfied with the way things are. They have lots of energy. They are open and creative. They're high on a scale called inquisitive. And they're very curious and really want to change the world and make things better. At the same time, they're sort of ambitious in that they sense that they want to push for results and make things happen. And they work out really well in scenarios where you're trying to change something, right? So one of the things that we find is that rebels show up a lot in entrepreneurial samples. So when we're working with entrepreneurs, we see lots and lots of rebels show up in those samples. And it's mostly because they want to make something, they want to change the world in some way, have some big impact. And so the other concern, though, if you're thinking about like, okay, what would be the problem with this? So in lots of ways, there's very positive aspects for rebels. Some of the things that you worry about are their sort of tendency to break the rules, tendency to go against the grain. We also see, even among organized criminals, significantly higher percentage of rebels in that kind of sample as well. So what we see with rebels is people who really go against the grain, want to push things in different directions, and don't mind breaking the rules if that means they can make an impact and make a change. A pretty sizable portion of the population falls in the category of marketers. And marketers are really seen as, the best word to describe them is very confident. So marketers are socially skilled, they're ambitious, they're driven, they're really hardworking, they really want to push for results. And what we find is that they often end up in sales roles a lot more frequently than you would expect. And I think this is in part because of their interest in business, their interest in commerce, but it's mostly interested in competing with others, right? And so they really want to compete and push for results, and they like competition, they really thrive on that. And so between that and their confidence, they have a deep belief in themselves. They want to be in those kinds of places where they can test themselves and push themselves to the limits. The sort of downside, the thing that we worry about with marketers is that confidence can sometimes stem into overconfidence. They might have a tendency to take on too much and to get themselves in positions where they can't complete all the projects that they promised. Again, another good chunk of the population falls into the category of proletarians. Proletarians, what you see with that profile is really flat scores, right around the 50th percentile on most of like the HPI and most of the MVPI. So this profile is mostly suggests sort of moderate interest, sort of moderately interested in activities, a little bit of a spike on security. So this group is mostly interested in having a sort of normal lifestyle, right? This is the group of people who's not interested in climbing the corporate ladder. They want to go to work. They want to do a good job. They see work as a part of life and what's important to them. And they want to go back home and see their families at the end of the day, right? So they're not up for late hours and trying to put in to impress the boss. They want to go and they see work as a part of what they're doing so that they can go and do the other things in life that they enjoy. So Congenials, their profile is really marked by high scores on adjustment, high scores on interpersonal sensitivity, and high scores on altruism. So this is a group that really cares deeply about people. They're very pleasant. They're very enjoyable to be around. They're really rewarding to deal with would be probably the best way to describe them. Because they're really easygoing, things don't really bother them, they don't get stressed out easily, they stay calm under pressure. And the big thing about the Congenials profile that we find in our work is that managers really like Congenials. So when we look at performance ratings, which are almost all done by supervisors and managers, we see the Congenials get the highest scores on that because mostly because they're so rewarding, so easy to deal with. They don't cause any problems for their supervisors, they don't cause problems for their bosses. If there is a problem, they sort of handle it themselves. They're really good at dealing with interpersonal conflict. So if they're group members or if they're having a conflict with somebody, they can handle it really smoothly without escalating things to a higher level. And so from their supervisors and managers' point of view, these are great employees because they just don't bring any problems to work. Overachievers are really marked by their sort of rule following and discipline. They really want to achieve. They're not really interested in having their achievements recognized publicly, but they really want to push for results and be known for doing a good job. Even if it's not a big public recognition about it, they want people to know that they've done a good job. They sort of have this desperation to have people think they're doing well. And they are at work, they're seen as adjusted, ambitious, they're seen as friendly. Pretty much everything on the HPI is high for the overachievers. They're really low on most of the HDS except dutiful and diligent, which sort of speaks to their rule following behavior. So what's interesting about the overachievers is that they have an interest in moving up in the company. Not necessarily overtly though. They don't really make that overtly known. They're mostly interested in doing a good job, and they feel like if I do a good job, I'll be rewarded, that somebody will notice, and then they'll reward me for doing my work, and that's the way things are supposed to be done. So they're really insistent on playing by the rules. This group just does not want to go outside the rules. They believe that the way to climb up and the way that you play the game fairly, right? You have to play the game fairly and squarely, and if you do a good job, you'll be rewarded. So they really have this idea that the world is fair and that everything will work out if they just keep working hard. So networkers is a really fun profile, especially in comparison to overachievers, because both groups are really ambitious, both groups are really hardworking. The networkers score much higher on sociability. They score higher on things like colorful, they score higher on things like mischievous. And this group is really interested in moving up in the company, so they score high on power as well. But their means for moving up is mostly through their connectedness. They have a real ability to persuade people, to charm people, to connect with other people, to bring them together. And so networkers see part of their task, they see it as an important part of their job, is to connect with other people in the business and to use those connections to help advance their career. So unlike the overachievers who feel like all you have to do is work, 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 and then people will notice, the networkers say, no, that's not gonna happen. I have to make sure people are noticing the work that I do. And so they spend more time, not just working, they work hard too, but they spend more time making sure their accomplishments are noticed and they're getting the recognition for those things. The other thing that's interesting about networkers compared to overachievers is they're much more willing to sort of skirt the rules. They're also, like rebels, they're also overrepresented in entrepreneurial samples. And so this group will sort of break the rules, skirt the rules, use their connections to move up, compared to, say, overachievers that are more like, if I just keep working hard, then eventually I'll move up. Misfits, this is actually a much smaller percentage of population, maybe around 6% or so. And the Misfits profile is marked by a couple of things. One is it's pretty high scores on security and really low scores across most of the HPI. So this includes adjustment, this includes prudence. Those two things are actually really quite low, also low on sociability. So this group prefers to work in isolation. They really don't want to work in large groups. They prefer to just sort of go their own way, so to speak. I mean, I think Misfits is a really fitting name because this is a group that feels like they don't fit in with most of the other social categories. They want to do their own thing. They want to stand out in their own way. And they're typically don't prefer group work. They really prefer to work on their own. In the workplace, what we see with Misfits is they have a lot of difficulties because often anymore, group or modern workplaces require some kind of cross-functional collaboration and working in teams. And so Misfits really have a lot of challenges because the low adjustment score means that they're often stressed out by these kinds of things. Their low sociability score means that they don't really like to work in those kinds of environments. And so, for the most part, when we see Misfits being successful, it's typically where they can work as individual contributor roles. Often they do well as remote workers as well. So the Preppers profile, in many ways, is kind of like the Misfits profile. There's a couple of key differences. One of the differences with the Preppers profile is they're a little bit higher on prudence. And they're a little bit higher in security. So this is a group that's sort of almost like defensive pessimists, right? So they sort of think, okay, bad things are going to happen, but I'm going to be prepared, and I'm going to be overly conscientious, and I'm going to be overly organized in advance. So I'm ready for these things to happen. And that's sort of the way they deal with stress. It's like, okay, I know stress is coming, but the way I deal with that is to get really organized and to get hyper-focused and get a lot of stuff done. And so the Preppers have some of the same difficulties that Misfits might have in terms of working in groups. They don't really prefer to do that. But the difference is that high score, that little higher score on prudence, gives them a little bit of a leg up when it comes to working in the workplace, because they're able to just to get themselves that much better organized and get things done in time. Mostly that seems to be mostly driven by these sort of insecurities, concern about failure, and that really drives them to get organized and get things done.